the person across the internet, tried to hit this ecom application, directly, right? Now what happened? This VM was capable of handling 100 requests per second, but all of a sudden they started saying 1,000 requests per second. In that case, what's going to be happen? My ecom application will get crash. Why? Because the resource is overutilized. Now that person, this particular VM is not capable of handling this much of the request. Now my entire business is down. The ecom.com is down completely because the resource which I utilize, right, is for the limited numbers, right? It's for that four CPUs and 10 gigs of RAM. But now what happened? This person is starting seeing 10 times of their application, 10 times of hits on their application. And this is the only VM. Now this is completely down. So to avoid that scenario, right, we need a routing solution. And that routing solution comes with the Azure load balancer. Now what this Azure load balancer is going to do it here. Let's say I configure my application to a ecom again. Again, the same scenario, ecom.com application is there, right? But this time, what difference I'm making it here? I'm putting a load balancer here. This is Azure load balancer. I'm putting it here. Now, what happened? There are some component. There are some component of this load balancer. First component, let me put it here. The public IP address. Public IP address. Now, why do we need that public IP address? Because in between this virtual machine and this person on the internet, I'm putting a layer of load balancer. So all the traffic, like the way previously it was directly getting routed to send it to this virtual machine. Now what I'll do, I'll send the traffic to virtual machine, right? And the traffic from that, let's say this Tim trying to reach out to that ecom.com. The team ecom.com will going to send the traffic, will going to resolve the traffic on my load balancer public IP, on my load balancer public IP. Let's say this public IP is 1.1.1.1. Now Tim will reach out to 1.1.1.1. The load balancer will take that traffic, right? Now in the backend, I can add this virtual machine as my backend pool. I can add this virtual machine as a backend pool here, right? And I will specify that this is my backend pool, this is my virtual machine, right? Now think about now the major difference which I'm making it here, right? Previously, it was only one virtual machine which was running it there. Now I can add multiple instances of my virtual machine. I configure the ecom application here as well. I configure the ecom application here as well, right? Now previously it was only one thing running. Now it's a three thing, right? And all of them I can configure my backend pool. I can configure my backend pool, right? So let me pull it as a BP. I can configure as a backend pool. And now whenever the traffic will commit here on the front end IP address, there should be some rules, right? Where they will get to know where exactly this load balancer need to send the traffic. For that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to write a rule here, which we call as a load balancing rule. And that load balancing rule is nothing. I'm going to specify that when the traffic is coming from internet, right, on the port of, let's say the person is sending on the port of 80, I'm going to say when the traffic is coming from the internet on this public IP address on the port of 80, send it to my backend pool. On what port? On the same 80 port. And I can do that port translation as well, right? But for now I'm sending on the port 80, right? So this way I can divert my traffic. Now the request will come. The person team reach out here. The request will first go here, the second go here, third go here. So that request flow will happen in a round robin. What does round robin means? So one by one, the request will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This way, the request will entirely divert to the backend pool, which is your backend pool here, right? Which is your backend pool here. Now, we like, so need of public IP address on which this person will send the traffic, the need of load balancing rule to send the traffic at the backend of backend pool of mine, and these VMs I'll add it as a backend pool here, right? Now there is another component, right? How this load balancer will get to know if this VM is alive, or this VM is alive, or this VM is alive. So for that, we have another configuration. We call it as a health probe. We call it as a health probe. So like the way this load balancer will keep in an interval of time, will keep sending some request to this uh, virtual machines at the back end, right? And if let's say he sent it for one time, he got the response, two time he got the response, three time he got the response, then he'll get to know, okay, this load balancer, this VM is up. But if he sent one time, he did not get the response. Second time also, he did not receive any response. Third time also, he did not receive any response. Then what load balancer will think? This VM is not working. This VM is down. Then the further routing, right? Further request which will come, it will not come on this virtual machine. Now the request will only go in a manner of 1, 2, 3, 4. It will automatically block this VM, or remove this VM from the traffic flow. Now let's say by any reason this virtual machine is also down, right? But the load balancer is capable of handling all that steps, and it automatically send the traffic to only this VM, because this is the only person in the backend pool who's alive. And he got to know via health probe. He got to know via health probe. This is the only person who's alive. Now what happened? Previously, when I was having 100 requests per second, I was able to, the single person directly, right, this way, this person was able to take that request. But when it came to the 1,000 requests, the person got crashed out here. The virtual machine got crashed out here, right? So for that reason, I need load balancer. Now think about, if I all of a sudden, right, on day-to-day basis, I'm getting 1,000 requests per second on day-to-day basis. But on a big billion sale day or any particular festival sale day, I started seeing 10,000 or even 100K requests per second. This is very large, right? Then what happened? In a general scenario, this VM got crashed out. But now the load balancer will not allow to do that. It automatically do the scale up and scale down, which means previously there are three VMs while handling the traffic. Now it's 10 times the request you are getting it. Now it automatically spin out a new VM here, spin out a new VM here, and will starting sending the traffic here in all. So previously the three VM, now five VM. If needed more, he can spin out more. So that we call it as a auto scaling. Auto scaling, automatically it's adding the configuration at the back end of the pool, right? So you don't have to worry about that. Now let's say what happened, and now the request, the sale is over. Now you started seeing the normal traffic 1000 per request. Then it automatically release this instance from their configuration and will send the traffic only to these three virtual machine, right? Now, so this is about like a load balancer in a typical theoretical way. Then that's the reason why we need that load balancer in a picture. Now there are multiple other things you can do. When the request come it here, right? Let's say on the port of 80, the request is coming on the port of 80. You can do that NAT also, which is network address translation, right? You can do network address translation. And if you want to send that at the backend, my application is running on a port of, let's say, some other ports, like let's say 8080. I'm running my port on application 8080, and I do not want to expose this post to the internet, right? Then you can take the traffic on the port 80 and you can translate that port at the backend to 8080. You can again translate that port to 80 and 80. And also this person will only aware that the application is running on the port 80, but at the backend of your pool, you're running on port of 8080. Now, this is about the load balancer. If I'll move further a little bit here, like I talked about some component, right? Like the public IP address, and now the load balancing rule. So the person from the load balancer, the person from the internet is going to hit the traffic on the public IP. This is my public IP, right? Now, as I talked about, right? Why do we need that health probe? Health probe to make sure these VMs are alive or not, right? So these VMs are alive or not. For that, you need that health probe here. Load balancing, if the request is coming on the internet, from the internet, I need to send it to the backend pool. So for that, I need to define some sort of rules here so that this load balancer will get to know if the request is coming here, I need to go it here. For that, I'm going to write a load balancing rule there, right? Now, the backend pool is at the VM which is got added to my load balancer is my backend pool here. We call that as a backend pool. So these are the some terminologies, right? These are the some terminologies, functionalities of Azure load balancer. Now, as I said, right, it comes with two different SKUs. SKUs means it comes with two different SKUs. SKUs is nothing. It's you call it as a variant. You call it as a variant. And basis on that, Azure is going to charge you. Basis on that, Azure is going to charge you. Azure charge you, right? Basis on that. Now what happened? It comes with two different variant. One is basic, one is standard. This basic is free, right? This basic is free, but it's having very limited things to be done it there, right? The machine at the backend pool, first thing, right? The major thing which you're seeing it there, the virtual machine which I'm adding at my backend of pool, right? The virtual machine which I'm adding, it needs to be in a availability set. You remember, right? I talked about that default domain, update domain, and then within a data center, how the virtual machine it needs to update if anything happened to that rack, right? Let's say this is my rack here, and my virtual machine is running it here, right? This is my server rack, and I configured my virtual machine in a east to west. Just for example, right? Now what happened if this virtual machine is running it here, right? And let's say Microsoft roll out some update to this rack, right? To this rack, Microsoft roll out some update, right? Now what happened? This VM will not be accessible because this rack is going to be update now. For to avoid that thing, right? What happened? The Microsoft, if you use for that update domain, we call that as update domain. If you have that upload domain, right? So replica or duplicate copy of your virtual machine is going to be configured within that data center into a different rack. So one replica here, one replica here as well, right? If update is happening to here, your VM is accessible via this rack, right? Now what happened? If let's say this is about the update domain, if I'll say that my entire rack is down, my entire rack is down, there must be the multiple reason. Let's say my power is off to this rack, power is off to this rack, right? Or you can say that there's some faulty connection happened, right? Some faulty connection happened. Because of that, this server rack is not available. For that fault domain, right? If you have that fault domain, you will still be able to access that data from that another rack which is available here. So that VM is available continuously to you. For that scenario, we call it as a availability set. And availability set here. And collection of availability set, we call it as a availability zone. Like this I talk about, right? Within one data center, these things are happening. If this is happening to multiple data center, like one in a East US, one in a West US, and one in a North Europe, so that collection we call it as a what we call it as a availability zone, right? So this is the basic need, right? This is what they are talking about. If the virtual machine which you are adding in that in backend pool, it needs to be in a availability set there. It needs to be in a availability set. And health probe, the same thing, you can do it on the HTTP or via TCP. So it means the probes, right? The health probes, the request which you're sending from your load balancer to the virtual machine to make sure that these VMs are up is only going to be done on the port of HTTP and TCP, right? So no support for the availability zone. If you have that availability set, right, configured in multiple reason, that support you are not going to provide. And if in case anything happened to that load balancer, so there is no SLA how much time that Azure is going to take, how much time Azure support is going to take to make your load balancer up, right? To make sure your load balancer is up and running. So because of all that scenario, right, you're not going to see the load balancer in a picture in any environment. And in some time, right, I think in 2025 last, they are going to decommission the basic load balancer. So it's going further, it won't be available to you, right? So now what standard load balancer, which is you're going to see it in a scenario. Standard load balancer, the number of requests you're getting. So let's say I'm getting 100 requests per, let's say 1000 requests per day, right? Or per second. Basis on that, the number of consumption you are doing it, the number of requests you're sending it, you're going to charge for your invoice, right? You're going to charge on the invoice. There is no dependencies whether that virtual machine is in availability set or availability soon. You don't have to worry about that. That's not an issue going to be happening here. Now, health probe, instead of just on HTTP and TCP, you're also going to get that health probe on HTTPS, which is 443. The support availability zone is also going to be provided, and SLA, which is 99.99%, which is 99.99%. So how much is this is? How much is this 99.99? If I'll go it here, if we'll see how much 99.99% in a year, I'm going to get it. So if I'll select it here, right? And if I'll put it 99.99%, so it means, right, on a yearly basis, you're going to get a downtime of 52 minutes and 9.8 seconds. On daily basis, you can get it 8.6 second of downtime on weekly and monthly. So if you're going to get at 99.99% SLA, right, which makes that it will be up and it will be available to you for 99.99%, then still you will be saying a 52 minutes of downtime. It can be happen 52 minutes of downtime in a year, right? So that's what like it can do. It is like that's what that load balancer is. Yeah. Now going further, right? This is about that basic things and that theoretical things we talked about. Now let's do one thing. Let's quickly move to that Azure portal and create a load balancer. Now before the load balancer, right? Before creation of that load balancer, I'm going to do certain things. What are those things I'm going to do it? I'm going to follow these steps where I'm going to do what all things I'm going to do it here. I'm first going to, this is my load balancer practical I'm going to do. I'm going to configure a resource group. As I told, right, resource group is mandatory for all resources which are defining inside the Azure. The resource group is very much mandatory. Without the resource group, you cannot do anything. You need to configure a resource group. And it's nothing, right? It's just a logical aggregation of resources. You can say every resources you can bind within an umbrella, right? So the hierarchy will be like the previous class which I told, right? The subscription and then resource group, and inside that resource group you can configure your resources like virtual network, virtual machine, load balancer, all that things you can configure within there. Now that's what I'm going to do. So first thing first, I'm going to configure a resource group here. Once that, how can I do that? I'll simply go to the Azure portal, right? On the search bar, I'm going to search the resource group. I'll click on the create. I'll provide the name and reason and then review and create. Very simple, right? Resource group got created here. That's it, right? Once a validation got done, my resource group is created. Now the resource group is created, right? I need to, if you remember, right, for that virtual machine, I told you this VNet is mandatory. In my previous class, I said VNet is mandatory, right? If you do not have any VNet, virtual machine, while configuring that virtual machine, it will automatically create a VNet. But now what I'm going to do it here, I'm going to create a virtual machine VNet for it, a VNet for it, right? How can I do that? I'm going to log in my Azure portal, going to search that in the global search bar, virtual network, going to click on create. I'm going to provide some detail like resource group, the which I created in my first steps. I'm going to provide my VNet name. I'm going to provide my reason. Click on next. Then I need to provide in the next step, I need to provide that address change and subnet on IP addresses tab. And then rest of the things, I'll keep it simple here. I'll keep it, uh, uh, I keep it as it is and then review create. Now my VNet got created, right? Then what I'm going to do it next, I'm going to configure a virtual machine. Again, going to log in my virtual machine portal, going to search for the VM, going to click on the create, going to provide the resource group, security type as in standard, image as in my Windows 2016, and then reason, size, username and password, click on next. Then the VNet and the subnet which I created in my next step, I'm going to provide that VNet and subnet here. And then I'm going to click a review and create. Now, after doing that, right, my virtual machine also got created. Virtual machine created, VNet created, resource group also created, right? Now, the next thing I'm going to do creation of my load balancer, which is Azure load balancer. How can I do that? Same thing, log into the Azure portal, search for the load balancer, click on create, provide the resource group name, which you created in first step, provide the name of the load balancer, like which name you're going to provide for your load balancer. You need to provide the reason. You can standard. So there are multiple SKUs are there, right? With two, we talked about basic, standard, and then there are another one as well, which we call as a gateway load balancer. And some of you is already about that gateway load balancer, but let me tell you what's that, right? So when you deploy any firewall or any virtual appliances, right? Then in that case, this gateway load balancer will act as a taking the traffic as a routing part. So, like say I deployed a Palo Alto firewall, or I'm going to deploy a checkpoint firewall. Then the load balancer which can spin out, we call it as a gateway load balancer there. That is used for the virtual appliances, for the virtual appliances. So that's another thing. But just to make you aware here. So now I'm going to create as a reason as standard and type as in public. So you are going to get the public load balancer and then internal load balancer. What is the difference between those two? Right? Public we talked about when the traffic coming from that internet or the user hitting from that public IP address, we call it as a public load balancer. Then what is this internal load balancer? So now let's see. This is your Azure environment. This is entire your Azure environment, right? And you are running some application on this virtual machine, which is inside a VNet. This is my VM. And inside that VM, you have the VNet which you've configured, right? On this virtual machine, you're running an internal application. Let's say I'm running my hrdata.in, where I storing that application, where I'm storing their salary slip, everything, right? To my employees, right? And now this HR data should not be accessible on the internet, right? The person on that internet should not be aware about this thing, right? Then how can I make sure that everything, right? The things which is I use for the public should also available for the internal, right? This is another VNet. On this, the person is sitting via virtual machine, right? Is trying to access that virtual machine, trying to access this HR data. So what I can do, the same concept, same thing, everything which we talked about for public is going to be happen for the internal as well. I'm going to place an internal load balancer here. Now the traffic from within the Azure VNet to VNet, from this VNet on which the virtual machine for the user is placed, right, to this VNet is going to be happen via internet. It's going to take that. Previously, we were taking on the public, right? Here we are taking on a public IP address. Now I'm going to take on the private IP address. On the backend pool, I'm going to configure this HR data, everything. So this is about internal load balancer. Let me summarize that again. So public is taking the traffic from the internet and then sending it to backend load balancer. Private is or internal load balancer is when the communication is happening within the Azure network, within the VNet to VNet, the VNet to VNet. This is VNet, this is VNet, and I can configure my load balancer here. The traffic can reach out here, can go to here. That is about private load balancer. Now, when I select the types as in public and then tier as in regional, you're going to get two tier. One as in regional here, tier means, and then other one is as a global, right? If any failover happen, right, this global will have that replicas of your load balancer created in multiple location, like in US, in India, right, or anything else, right? So this is you're going to get that redundancy from the different reason. However, for the regional, right, the resource is going to be in a region base. You are going to get the traffic or you're going to get that request from a particular region, and then the failover will also going to happen within that region as well. So two types of regional and global. Then I'm going to provide the front-end IP, the public IP. It's called that the front-end IP, which I told, right? It's the same. We call it as a public IP for my load balancer. And it's not need only just you can only one public IP, right? You can configure multiple public IP address. right? On the multiple public. So let's say on this public IP address, on one public IP address, you're running xyz.com. You can take the traffic on public.com and can send to your backend view. If you're running that another abc.com, you can take the traffic on that abc.com and can send to the backend pool. Then once that public IP configuration is done, I'm click on next. I'm going to provide my backend pool. The backend pool, if you remember, the virtual machine which is there on the backend, I'm going to provide that. Then I'm going to provide the inbound rule, right, which is the load balancing rule, and then click next, review and create. That's what I'm going to do as a part of load balancer demo here. So being that said, let me quickly go to Azure portal and let's get started. Let me open my Azure portal. So as I said, right, let me firstly go and create a resource group. Very simple. I can type the resource group here. And on the first thing, right, which you're seeing, click on the resource group. And one more, like one of the important concept to be remember, right? When you configure that load balancer, make sure that the backend pool, the resource, right? I was talking about this VM. I was talking about this VM. If this VM in a central India, your load balancer should be also in a central India. It should not like it should place in East US, right? The reason should be same for your resources. If they are putting your virtual machine in central India, make sure you're putting your load balancer in central India itself only. Okay, so that is remember that point. So if I'll write it here, load balancer, load balancer reason should be same as your backend resource, or my I said it backend pool, right? Backend resource. So this is the point here to remember, right? On this is the point to make your concept strong here. If I'll go here and click on create, what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a resource group, which is very simple, right? Subscription. I'm going to call my resource group as in like demo 11. I'm going to configure it in a central India region. Where is my central India? That's here, right? Tags I'm not going to create. I'm going to click review and then create. Let's quickly see resource group got created, right? Demo one. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to configure a VNet. I'm going to configure a VNet here. Now, as we talked about, there is only one resource group existing in my environment, and it's showing me that demo one which I just created, right? And let me name that VM. Let me name that VNet. So I call it as a VM VNet just for the demo, right? VM VNet, and I'm going to configure in a central India. Click on next. Keep everything as it is, as a firewall, Bastion, DDoS. Now here I'm going to provide my address range. It's taking that larger address range. Let me do some smaller one here. It's 10.1.1. Instead of going for 65,000 IP, you can see it, right? If /16 is giving me 65,000 IPs. If I'll select like /20, how much IP? 4,000 IP. If I'll select 24, how much? 256 IP, right? So all that CIDR notation, right, which is classless interdomain routing, is going to get the number of IPs to me. I'll select for /20 here, which is I'm going to get a 4,096 IP. And then the subnet is automatically going to create, and it's taking that subnet for 256 IP, which is /24 CIDR. It's going to take it there. Click on next, click on review and create. It's creating that VNet here. Now what I'm going to do it here, right? Once my VNet is created, right? My VNet is created here. Inside my subnet, right? I'm going to create another subnet. For what? I'm creating two VNet, right? So I'll place that two VNet in two VMs in two different VNet. I'm going to create a VNet VMs, right? Two different VMs. The two different VM for my load balancer. This is my LB, and this is my VM1. This is my VM2, and I'm going to place these two VM in one VNet, but in different subnet. In one VNet, but in different subnet. So this is my VM1 will reside in default subnet, and then VM2 will reside in, I'll call it as a default 2, right? And I'm going to take how much IPs? I'm going to take the 24 IPs, which is /24 256 IPs here. Click on add. Now the two subnets got created. Now our time to go. So what we have done so far, if I'll go in the step, right, which I've written it down, the steps which I've written it on my notepad. So far, the load balancer, sorry, this resource group creation is done. The VNet creation is also done, right? Now what I need to do, I need to create my virtual machine and then configure that IaaS server over there. So let's go quickly do that. Go in virtual machine. It's very all the things which I did in my previous class, I'm going to do it here. Now let to again tell, right, everyone, what I'm doing it here. I'm configuring a virtual machine. This is my VM1, VM2, and I'll going to place a load balancer in front of VM, right? And I'm going to take that traffic from the internet. So the load balancer will take the traffic and we're going to send it there to there. And these two VMs are residing inside the one VNet, but in different subnet. This is my default 2 subnet. This is my default 1 subnet. Okay, this is what I'm going to do it here. So far, the VNet creation done, the resource group creation is done. I'm going to configure a VM here. So let me click on VM create. Configure the resource group here. Name that VM1. I'm going to name my VM1 as VM1 here. I'm going to select that security tab standard. I'm going to select my Windows 24 security 2016 as an image. And I'm going to select this is my size of VM, which is having one CPU and 3.5 gigs of RAM. Right? Going to provide that name here. The login name. So it would be Azure admin and then password. Again, the password. Now I'm going to allow 3389 also here. Click on desk. Click on desk. Now here, right, VM which I created, the VNet which I created is my VM1 VNet. This is the only VNet I am having it, right? This is the only VNet I created. So it's just showing me that VNet itself. Now, the two VMs, I created two subnet, right? Default 1 and default 2. So for the first VM, I'm going to put in my default 1, default subnet, right? Now, public IP, since I am not having any IP, it's creating me a new public IP. But if you want to create, it's very simple. Click it here, provide the VNet IP. There is basic and standard, right? Assignment is static, which means if the VM got deleted, then the public IP which is here, that public IP, you're going to restore it, and that public IP will have the fixed IP. So let's say if you are not selecting, previously the VM was always having that, previously it was dynamic IP was also there, but if you have that static, which means if you created a VM which have that public IP of 1.1.1, and so this IP will remain same till the resources exist, right? This IP is not going to change. So this is the static thing. But if going to change it every time, we call it as a dynamic. But this is static for us. So let's just click on create. I'm not going to do it anything since I already have that public IP they are providing me. Now what I'm going to do next, click on management, keep everything as it is. Nothing going to change in that load balancer. It review and create. Now since my VM is getting created, right? I'll do one more thing. I'll create another VM as well quickly. Let's go again virtual machine, and I'm going to create a VM2. Going to create again the demo one, VM2, Central India, trusted standard, data center same, 2016, same size of VM. Call it as a admin. Put the password here.
Sumit, resource group is wrong here. You have selected.
No, demo one I selected, right? This is demo 11 I created.
Okay, okay.
Now, going to put that password again. Now, everything keep it is simple. You can keep that premium SSD as well, but just to avoid the cost I'm selecting as an standard hard disks. Networking. Now the VNet, I need to put this VM into a different subnet. So the VNet will seem, but the subnet will differ here. The VNet 2. The another is creating a new public IP, VM2 public IP, right? Everything keep it as it is. Go ahead, and review and create. It's creating that VM as well now. Now, initialize that deployment. Now, since that deployment is happened, right? Let's see that VM1 got deployed. Go in virtual machine. See that VM1 is deployed now. Now, what I need to do it here, I need to connect to this virtual machine. How can I do that? Simply click on connect, download that RDP file here. Just download it, open that, click on connect, provide your password here.
So, Sumit, I have one question.
I'll take that question in the end. If the meantime you have it question, please put it on the chat. I'll definitely
Sure.
going to answer. Yeah, thanks.
Sure.
I'll going to put it here. Password. Now it's connecting me. Now that VM1 is logged in. I logged into my VM1 and it's updating that profile of mine, right? So now this is happening. Go in the VM2. See if VM2 got created. It's also got created. Go in VM2. Click on connect. Download the RDB file. Open that RDB file here. Click on connect. It takes some time because that it just initially got created, right? Till the VM agent is not ready. If you created a VM and you're not getting that VM access, right? Don't worry. It takes some time to get the agent ready, which means that RDP agent to get ready, right? Now click on connect. Download RDP file. Click on connect. Put your password here. Now you logged into both of your VM, right? What I'm going to do, I'm going to place, this is my VM2. You can see it here, VM2. And where is my VM1? This is my VM1. Let me put it the same way. Put the VM1 here and then VM2 here. Now you can see both the VM at the side by side. Right. Now what I'm going to do it here, I'm going to configure a web service. For that, what I need to do, just open that server manager, click on add and role. I'm doing that. Click on next. This is I'm doing on VM1. Next. And select that web service, which is there. Add that role. Again, I'm doing on VM1. Click on next, next, and install that role. Now that web server role is getting installed. Now in the VM1, come on the VM2, click on web server. The server manager is getting ready. Wait for a second. Click on here, the same thing which I did it there. Next, here. Select the web service role. Add feature. Next, next, and install that role here. Now, once that role will get installed, right? What I'm going to do it next, I'm going to create a notepad file. I'm going to create a notepad file and will place there. So I'll get to know this is my VM1. Let me open that notepad file here. And I'll quickly just put a simple heading H1 HTML code here, and we'll say this is my what? This is my VM1. So I'll say VM1, or let me say it like this way, virtual machine. Call it as a virtual machine 1, and then I'll close the heading here. And I'm going to save it where. So when you create that web server, right? When you create that web service role, there is a there is a folder is going to be created automatically in C drive. Let me show you this. Automatically, server is going to create it, right? So I'm saving it. Go in a C drive. There is inetpub, right? This folder will get created when you add that web server role. Inetpub www.root. I'm going to save my file here. So I'll say it. Let's say default.html, right? And another all document, and I'll save it here. So this is done. Now the same thing I'm going to do it here as well. I'm going to open my notepad. The same thing which I did it here. Let me do it here as well. H1, and then I'll say it virtual machine. What? Virtual machine 1, right? This is my virtual machine 2. Sorry, this is my virtual machine 2. So virtual machine 2 here, and let's close the heading. Let's close the heading, right? Sorry, let me put that virtual machine, right? Again, going to say in the same folder. That folder got created while installing that web service. C drive, inetpub, root, all files, and then default.html. Default.html here. Let me save that here as well. So now these two got saved, right? And if I'll try to access that, how can I access that? With the private IP internally, right? I'm going to first access this internally, and then we'll see on that from the internet. So this is my VM2 private IP 10.1.1.4. And if I'll go in here, open the web browser, and if I'll type it here, so yeah, so my web server is accessible internally, default.html. Yeah, so this is my virtual machine 2. The same check for the VM1 as well. What is the public private IP of my VM1? Let's go and quickly find out that. Virtual machine 2, VM1. What is my public private IP? 10104, right? 10104. 10104. So let's go in VM1. Open that web browser. Ten one zero four. 10.1.0.4. The web server is also accessible. Now, if I go in a default.html where I place my file, oh, this is my virtual machine 1. Okay. Now the web service is accessible within that virtual machine, right? What about internet? If I'll go to access it from internet, from VM1, copy the public IP address, type it here, HTTP. This my port is running on HTTP. I will not be able to access it. The same goes for VM2 as well. If I'll try to access it on the public, I won't be able to access. Why? I'll tell you the reason. Because if I'll go it here on my virtual machine, right? I told you to connect your network. You need to have that network security group rule allow, right? I'm accessing on port 80. But is that port 80 is open for me on that virtual machine? No, it's not open, right? Only RDP port is open. And that's why I able to take that 3389 here, right? But if I need to open that port 80 as well, I need to write a rule here. Let me quickly write the rule. So port 80 source anyone coming from anywhere, even you are coming, you will be able to access that. And what service you are going to do, any destination and then port on 80, right? I'm going to allow that communication. Similarly, if I'll do it for what VM2 as well. Similarly, I'll do it for VM2 as well. Open that VM2 NSC, go in inbound, click a role. So what I'm doing it here, right? I'm saying from anywhere from the internet, right? Or with any port range, dynamic. Asterisk means dynamic. With any port range, anywhere the person can come, and with any destination, right? And then port, what the service you are going to access? The port 80 it's going to be accessed, and the protocol is TCP, UDP, SMP. Allow that action. My priority, lower the priority, higher the preference, right? If the priority is like 100, you're going to get the higher preference compared to 310. Click on add. Role is getting added here. The both role got added. Now let's go back here. Now see my VM is accessible now. Web service is accessible. Now let's see from the default dot HTML. Okay, this is my virtual machine one. Same I'm going to do with my virtual machine two. Now what I'm going to do, the next step, I'm going to configure my what? I'm going to configure my, one second. What I'm going to do it now, since my VM is accessible, right? But I am not going to access this VM via public IP, right? Because public IP will be accessed. I'll be doing it by my front end load balancer. This is my load balancer, right? And I said I'll be putting a public IP address here, right? And then person from the internet will access that, right? And then it will send the traffic to the backend VM. So why do we need that public IP address on the virtual machine? No, right? I do not need that. The public IP, I do not need that because the load balancer is going to send the traffic on the private IP address, at the back end, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove this public IP from the virtual machine. Let me go there. Now do that the same thing. Remove that public IP from that virtual machine. Remove that public IP from the virtual machine. Go here. It's very easy to remove that. Why I'm doing that, right? Because I'm going to send my traffic on my public IP of load balancer and then to private IP of that VM. So if I'll go here on my virtual machine, VM1, go how to remove that? Go in a NIC, right? That NIC which is got created. Click on network interface card. Click on IP config, right? This is my IP config which have that this private IP address and this public IP address. I need to remove the public IP address. Just click here and remove that associate, right? Don't click on that. Uncheck this associate public IP address and click on save. This will remove the public IP address from VM1. Same do for VM2 as well. Click on NIC because public IP address is attached to the NIC, right? Or network interface card of my virtual machine. I'm going to remove that. Let me remove that as well. Click on save. So I'm removing that public IP address from the both virtual machine. Now only this will only have that private IP address. See the public IP address gone now. Only have that private IP address. Now it's time to go and create the load balancer. So what we have done so far, if I'll go in my where my notepad, right, you'll see what I've done is so far I created a resource group. I created that VNet, right? I created that the virtual machine, configured that the web server role there. Now I'm going to get the load balancer. Let's do that. Go over there and configure the load balancer. Search the load balancer here. Now there are multiple load balancer Azure provide, right? We are talking about, if you look at here, right, on this side, on the right left side of your, you are seeing some load balancer services that Azure provide, right? And what are those load balancer services? Let me select my pen here. So what the load balancer services provide? So we are learning about application gateway, which you are going to learn in a while. And then front door is also there. Load balancer is also there. Traffic manager is also there. Don't worry, we are going to learn everything here in a one by one. So today we are learning for the load balancer, which is the network load balancer I talked about. The network load balancer, right? And then application gateway is a application load balancer, which works on the L7 layer, application gateway, right? So these two we're talking about. Traffic manager and front door we'll learn in a later on, right? So let's do that. Click on create. Since I'm in the load balancer, right, I'm going to create here. If you create that, right, it's asking to provide the resource group. The resource group which I have at demo 11. The name I'm going to provide it. Let's say I'm providing a name as in demo dash LB, right? And where I'm going to put it, I'm going to put in a central India. If you remember, right, these things we talked, SQs, I told you the standard is for the what metrics are going to get with the standard, the gateway, and the basic. See, I told you, right, it's returning soon as well. So going further, you're not going to see that basic tier there, right? The standard, the gateway for the virtual appliances, which we talked, right? I'm going to select the standard. Now type internal, the communication which is happening within that VNet to VNet, public from internet. So in our case, it's going to be public from, because that team is coming from that public, that team, right? That person, the person is coming from that internet and going to hit my load balancer public IP, is going to hit my load balancer public IP here. And then the load balancer will have some rule configured, which we call as a load balancing rule. And what it will do, it will, by the role of the load balancing, it will send the traffic to backend pool. And what is that backend pool? This backend pool is my virtual machine. This backend pool, which I created two virtual machine and configured that IIS server, right? So backend pool is going to, the backend pool is going to be these two virtual machine. I'm going to add that in a backend pool here, right? Now, if you, the traffic will, how the traffic will going to reach out? One by one in a round robin way. In a round, I'm just revising all this thing in a round robin way. One this time, one this time, 3, 4, 5, 6. This way, the traffic will come to here, right? The round robin way, right? The health pro is also there, right? How my load balancer get to know if this VM is up or this VM is up or down, right? So we'll configure a health pro for that. We'll configure a health pro for that, right? Now, if in this case, let's say this, so this is what happening. This TIM is coming, right? The inbound traffic, we call that as a, when the traffic is coming to load balancer and going to virtual machine, we call it as a inbound traffic, right? Now what happened? If this virtual machine needs to reach out to some internet, let's say for the patching part, right? Let's say this virtual machine need to go to the internet to update itself from Microsoft, to update some patches from the Microsoft. So in that case, it need, this virtual machine need to go to the internet, right? Then how this is going to reach out to the internet? We will define the rule of outbound rule. We will be defining a outbound rule so that virtual machine, the backend pool can reach out to the internet. This will be the outbound rule, right? So all that things, and then there will be another thing which are saying it, that is NAT rule. That is network address translation rule. I told you, right? If you want to translate your port, let's say this team is reaching out to load balancer to access the service on the port 80, right? HTTP, right? and then IP address of that load balancer, right? Accessing on port 80. And if you are running your service on port 8080, for an example, right, running a service on the port 8080, so you can do that network address translation of the port, right? A port address translation of here, you can divert that traffic to 80 to 8080. So that's all thing which I'm going to do it here. I'm going to configure that things here. Let me see you there. So I'm going to select a regional service here. And then as I told you, right, front end IP, which is public IP address. Click on front end IP address, provide the front end public IP address, right? Let me create this in here. Public IP, I need to name that public IP address. So let's say I'm saying it LB. There is a proper nomenclature, right, which you need to follow when you're going to have it on the organization level. I'll show you that how that resource level nomenclature is going to be followed, right? So LB PIP, right? Or you can say that front end, right? LB PIP, right? I'm going to configure that IP address, everything. The public IP address, I just have it for VM1 and VM2, right? So I'm going to create a new one here and we'll say LB PIP, right? Load balancer public IP. And then click on save. Everything will remain as it is same. I'm going to click it. So front end IP got created. Backend pool, I'll leave it as it is for now. I'll front inbound rule will leave it as it is, outbound also. I'm going to tell you in a while how can I do that in a once this load balancer is going to create. Run that final validation and click on create. I'm going to create that load balancer here. So this is my load balancer is creating. Let me again draw a simple diagrams. So my load balancer got created. Let me click it here. Now front end IP is there, right? Front end IP is there. If we go in a settings, there are multiple things, right? Front end IP we talked about, back end pool we talked about, health probe we talked about, right? Load balancing rule we talked about, inbound NAT rule to transfer that NAT rule we talked about, and outbound rule to reach out to the internet. These are the major component which we talked about here. Now let's see the configuration one by one. If I'll go here, I'll see the front end IP, and this is my public IP which I got. I can create multiple public IP, right? So one for this one for this one, right? So this is my public IP here. Now backend pool. What is the backend pool in our case? The virtual machine. Let's say I'm naming it as a uh, backend pool. Just for the simplicity, I'm leaving the backend pool here. What is that name of that VNet on which my virtual machine is there? It's VM VNet, right? Now I can add the IP address of my virtual machine, the private IP address, or I can add the NIC because NIC is also attached to my virtual machine. So I'm going to opt the NIC. Now see these two virtual machine I created, which have that IP address 1.0 and then 1.1.4. Let me add these two in my backend pool. How simple it is, right? I added that in my backend pool here in my load balancer backend pool. Click on save. Now its backend pool is getting deployed. Always remember, do one by one, right? If you're trying to do, you duplicate the tab and you're trying to do, let's say, load balancing rule in different and backend pool in one tab, right? So that will happen that your application will, that load balancer will crash out, right? So do one by one configuration there, right? So I'm trying to add my load balancing rule here. See, the backend pool came here, right? The IP address is this, the resource name VM1, VM2. This is my IP address. This is my network interface, which is there. Now it's there on that availability zone, right? Because I added my virtual machine, my one availability zone. Resource status is running, right? Now that is about backend pool. Health probe, I need to configure to make sure my virtual machine is up and running for my load balancer. Let's say I'm saying it health probe here, right? And now what is this, right? How you are saying it there? Let me show you that. Let me explain that, this also. So you're saying that the protocol is TCP and port is 80 and then interval is 5. So it means every interval, every 5-second period, within every 5 seconds, it's going to send a protocol on TCP and the port of 80. So what happened? This is my virtual machine. This is my virtual machine and this is my load balancer. That load balancer will going to send a health probe every 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds on a port of 80 on a port of 80, and then TCP with the protocol of TCP. It's going to send to the virtual machine to make sure this is up. If it's not going to receive the response within the 5 second, right, it's going to mark that virtual machine as down. Then it's not going to send the traffic. So that is what it's going to. Interval is 5 second, port is 80, protocol is this one. Let me click on add. Sorry, let me select my pen here. Let me click on save. So this is going to be saved now. Load balancing rule is the one which I told you, right? I need to define the role from where the front end IP will take that. So name of my load balancing, let's say I'm saying it uh, for PIP, which is front end PIP, to my VM, just for my simplicity, right? Now, what is my front end IP? It's the only one, right? The public IP address for my load balancer. What is the backend pool which I added? I added that BP, in which I added two of my virtual machine. Now, at what port I need to take that traffic from the internet? I'm going to take the traffic from the 80, port 80. And what is the backend port? Because my application was running on HTTP, which means on the port 80. So that I'm going to add it there. I do not have certificate. That's why I'm adding on the port 80 here. So taking the traffic from the internet on port 80 and sending it to the port 80. What is the health pro? We just configure the health pro. Select that as well, right? Leave as it is everything. So session persistence, let me tell you that before that. Session persistence, right? So let's say these two virtual machines are there, right? And the load balancer is there, and that person is out there, right? And now that load balancer is sending the traffic to this one, this load balancer. And now if this user wants, right, to stick that traffic, to stick that session with this load balance, this virtual machine itself, not going to send this on, not send the traffic on this virtual machine for this particular user. So we call it as a session persistence, where a particular session is going to be established with one of the backend pool only. And why this is needed, right? If you see in a real scenario, if you're going to opt for any product, let's say you are trying to buy a phone, right? And then you're putting your address and putting everything, right? And then doing the checkout there. During that time, if your session get disconnected, right, or session get transferred to anyone, again you need to put every detail, right? So in that case, I want my session persistence to be there, so that my entire session is going to be happen on this virtual machine itself. So if you want to do that session persistence, you can do that, but I'm not going to do it here, right? If that idle timeout will be 4 minutes, the session will going to be log out, right? Enable floating IP, right? That is the concept. If I'm sending the traffic on the virtual machine, at the backend also I'm going to send the traffic on the virtual machine, and then it's going to send to the multiple port. I'm not going to enable that. Let me click here or add it. Click here and save it. I'm going to save that load balancing rule here. I'm going to save that load balancing rule. But saving that load balancing rule. Once that is done, right? Let's see. Inbound NAT rule, I'm going to tell you in a while. Outbound for the internet, that is to send the traffic on the internet, right? Now my backend pool is up. I configured the head balance, load balancing, health proof also I configured. Now it's time to see if my VM is working or not. Copy that load balancer IP, go in internet, put it here. See, it's working, right? If I'll let me open a new page here. Type that HTTP, type that, enter. So my this is working, right? And now where exactly this load balancer is sending the traffic? Let's check that, right? Virtual machine 1, virtual machine 1. So it's creating a attached to one virtual machine, right? Now let's further see the other virtual machine. So what happened? I had taken that public IP, and from there I'm accessing my application there. From there I'm accessing my application there. So this is my virtual machine. This is my virtual machine 2. If I'll copy that and we'll open in a incognito. See, now traffic went to virtual machine 2, right? Previously it was virtual machine 1. Now I enable another session, it got to virtual machine 2. If I'll do it again, so this way the traffic will go one by one, round robin way, right? to every virtual machine. And now how can I accessing? I'm accessing on load balancer IP here in my load balancer IP. If I'll do one thing, right? If I enable one of my, if I'll disable one of my let's say I'm going to put that virtual machine 1 or virtual machine 2 in a put down state, in a shutdown state. I'm going to shut down my VM2 here. Let me stop that VM2. Will my application will still accessible? Yes, because one of the VM is already there in the backend pool. One of the VM is already there in the backend pool. And if load will get increased, automatically this load balancer will do the auto scaling. Let me stop that. See, my VM is still accessible and it's sending to the virtual machine 1 because that is the only one who's available currently. See, my VM did not get impacted. My application did not stop working and it's working as it is. Now it's time to send to virtual machine 2. Virtual machine 2 is stopping it here. And if we'll check for the health probe, right now it's going to send the health probe to my backend VM2 and it will tell you that if the resource is up and down, right? Resource is up and down. There are some other concepts as well. If you want to take out that automate template, which we'll discuss later, see, it's going to send you that temp resource health event, right? Everything is going to get it here, right? Because the load balancer is not going to available for my VM2. It's going to show me unknown, right? Otherwise, it's going to show you available there. So what we did so far, to summarize it here, right? To summarize it here, what we did on the load balancer part, right? Let's just talk about the load balancer, what we did. So from my laptop was on the internet, right? I configure a load balancer and I configure two virtual machine at the packet, VM1, VM2, and I configured the IAS service on both of them. IAS service on both of them, right? Now I was sending the traffic on the load balancer public IP, and it's on the there was no public IP on that VM1, right? VM1, VM2, and then on the load balancer, I write on the load balancing route, and it's sending the traffic to the VM1 and VM2 there. And I shut down the VM2, but my application is still accessible via VM1 here. Now, so these are the things which we discussed. Now, if we look at this presentation, right, there are some component which is important. The public IP address to